We have our next guest, who is Terence Lester. And Terence, you're going to have to let me know if it's Dr. Terence Lester or what, because I looked at your Twitter and I saw the PhD, so I want to be clear. But Terence Lester, who's doing some incredible work in terms of homelessness and folks without addresses. So Terence, if you don't mind, can we jump right in? But clarify real quick, what's your title? Is it Dr. Lester?
Not yet. I'm PhD student, so I'm
Cool.
working. Yeah.
It's in the works. It's in the works. So I thank you again for being with us today. I was watching some of your videos on YouTube, and I want you to share with our audience, if you will. You talk about what it means to truly see others. So, what does that ethic look like in the work, in the context of your work? Operationalize that for us.
Yeah, when I talk about seeing specifically our neighbors without an address, I'm talking about including them in the whole, talking about seeing the whole community. Most often, when we think about homelessness, not just here in the city of Atlanta, but nationally and globally, there's a sense of invisibility that accompanies what it means to experience this plight. And what that does when we behave in a way that has been socialized, socially constructive of how we actually treat those who are without a home, we actually do more damage to their self-esteem, their confidence, and we step on their inherent dignity. So when I talk about seeing our houseless neighbors, I'm talking about seeing them for who they are, realizing that they have stories just as important as our stories, realizing that they're someone's nephew or brother or sister or mom or cousin, that they are or should be included into the fabric of the whole community. I think that is what essentially King is talking about when he says that we are a part of the world house, that the world is our address. We can't even wake up without having a global experience of how we are able to function and operate. And when we think about our houseless neighbors, we have got to ensure that just because a person doesn't have an address does not mean that they're not our neighbor.
Thank you for that. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of PhDs in this space, and I appreciate you bringing your context to the discussion, especially because what we saw with COVID-19 is that we oftentimes think about folks who have been using, in many ways, our communities to seek refuge and shelter. And folks oftentimes talk about how the cities didn't have the funding to actually build shelter for those folks. But yet we saw, outside restaurants pop up all across the country, despite what we knew to be true about the lack of homes for our homeless populations. And so knowing the fact that the vast majority of people who are homeless are people of color, I'm curious for you if you could talk about what is the role racism plays in homelessness, and how can we ensure that we're looking at the issues from the intersectional lens as we try to create solutions for change?
Yeah, I think racism has contributed greatly. We can look at redlining and how cities and the government actually legalized what it meant for home ownership for persons of color. I mean, when you think about public housing back in the day, public housing was for war veterans who returned from war, right? And then this idea of single family homes started about, which created suburbs, and black war veterans weren't able to move into those housings. And so this kind of concentrated poverty in cities. And then cities started to draw lines around neighborhoods where they wanted to concentrate persons of color or black people in these impoverished neighborhoods. And so racism has always been a part of persons of color not having access to wealth. And when I'm talking about wealth, I'm talking about access to home ownership, right? And so we have always had to overcome and make do. And so we see a lot of African Americans or black people actually dealing with what I call acute homelessness. It's not that there's a large number of African Americans living on the streets, but there are a larger population of Black people actually living with relatives, people who are couch surfing or sleeping on the floors or in the basement. And that's something that we've got to address in terms of getting critical access to affordable housing for those Black persons who are without homes. I think it's structural, and I think love should call us to this conversation of equity and balancing the scales of home ownership for persons of color in our country.
Oh, that's, just for our viewers, some new language for you. Acute homelessness, that's a new one for me. Thank you for that. And then neighbors without an address. And I think that framing is critical, right? Moving the discourse from just labeling people as homeless to our neighbors without an address. That fundamentally shifts how we engage and deal with people. Talk a little bit about what would it mean from your view? What would it look like for love to interrupt the issue of homelessness in America?
Yeah. Love to interrupt the issue of homelessness in America looks like decriminalizing what it means to not have an address. Right now, there are cities all around our country that have increased their ordinances where people can't sit in certain areas. Hostile architecture has become a thing where cities have literally excluded what it means to live without an address by placing boulders underneath bridges or spikes in between alleyways, or putting, these structures around venting systems when in the winter people experiencing homelessness are trying to access warmth. You can't sleep in public. There are certain cities where you can't even share a meal with a person experiencing homelessness without that person experiencing some form of criminal punishment from law enforcement. And so love to me looks like decriminalizing what it means to be poor. Martin King was right. Dr. King was right when he says, as long as there is poverty in this world, no man can be rich, totally rich, even if he or she has $1 billion. So love looks like in affirming the inherent dignity of those who are experiencing homelessness and including them in the whole community, in the conversation. We shouldn't be creating ordinances about people experiencing homelessness without including their voices. And we shouldn't be creating any ordinances about people experiencing homelessness when it strips the very human rights that they should have access to as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. For folks who are listening and tuning in, they're probably trying to figure out what can they do. We all probably at least know someone or have previously known someone without a home. What is a practical step that listeners can do at home in their work, in their everyday lives to ensure that we're helping to solve this issue for everyone impacted?
Yeah, for sure. There are a number of sites right now. I would suggest people look up Homelessness Bill of Rights, right? There are several cities that have embraced the human rights of those experiencing homelessness, where this Bill of Rights gives a person access, the right to exist, the right to equal and fair treatment, the right to share a meal, the right to have access for survival, practicing life-sustaining activities, the right to vote, right? Because when you're without an address and you don't have access to your identification card, you're not able to participate in the political process. I'm saying that we need to reach out to those persons who have the power to actually make these ordinances and challenge them on them. Write your local officials, but also do the groundwork, get involved in a local community, carve out the margin in your life where you can practice service as a rhythm instead of an event, because service is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And that's how we show up to see our neighbors and affirm their inherent dignity.
Wow, that's, absolutely, again, edifying. This has been a remarkable conversation. Thank you, future Dr. Lester, for helping to broaden our scope as it relates to our neighbors without a home. And the key takeaway is what you mentioned about decriminalizing poverty and decriminalizing what it means to not have an address. So thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you for how you undergird and are upholding humanity with the work that you do. So thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.